as Alvaro said, hello to everyone. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your time with me, for letting me this opportunity of showing our wines, our projects, our wineries, everything our life. And this is wonderful, the communication through different countries right now, and right now in my home. And this is beautiful, and sharing with you with the sorting table and Instituto Cervantes community is beautiful. So today I'm presenting you two projects. The first one is here, Luis Perez with the dog. This is the family project we started in 2002. This is my everyday job, okay? And the second one is Manuel Antonio de La Riva. I know it's difficult to say. You can easily say La Riva, and that's all. The first one is with my family. Second one is with my partner, friend, and almost brother, Ramiro Ibanez. So they are really easy to distinguish each other because the first one, we own the vineyards, we own the winery, it's my everyday job. And here it's more like academical project. We can, buy grapes here, we can buy wines here. It is something for show people that we are not against the classic sherry. And in fact, classic sherry could be in the vineyard also. Because, through the last 15 years or maybe 10 years, we have been considered like a little outsiders. So La Riva is a beautiful project to show people that we love sherry, even they are old. So let's start and move, okay? So starting with Luis Perez, this beautiful picture of the family was taken like, 37, 38 years ago, more or less. I'm 40 right now. And I'm in the hands of my father, right? And he's Luis Perez. He's giving the name of the winery. And I think I'm the fifth generation making sherry here in my family since I don't know how to say in English. It's like great grandfather or something like that. And he was a viticultor. We call it here Malleto. His son was like a capataz in Bodega. My grandfather owned a winery in Jerez and owned a vineyard in Balbaina also. He needed to sell it in the 1980s, more or less, because the crisis. My father was the winemaker of Domecq. That was the biggest winery ever in the history of Spain during the last, 3 centuries, more or less. And here you can see a picture with, the legends like Jose Ignacio Domecq, Beltrán Domecq. All of them was really, this was a really beautiful moment in the 70s, 80s. Really good moments for the sherry market. I think, I grown listening these beautiful histories about how big, how great, great wines we had in Jerez and the region. But I just lived crisis, I will explain it later. So what happened with Domecq, that it was too big, that it was sold by pieces in the 90s. And it was something, it was a loss for Jerez, really huge. And it was a pity. So my father, went out and he established as a professor of enology in the University of Winemaking here in Cádiz. And he didn't want to cut everything with wines and the family. So he bought a property called Vista Hermosa. You have the name here. And at the beginning, it wasn't a business, he planted a vineyard just to the wines, make the wines to ourselves, to the family, and for friends. That's all. And the problem was that in that moment, my father was a real, a little disappointing. I'm gonna admit more people, beautiful. And he was a little disappointed with the sherry market because the prices was really, really low, and the competition and everything was, really bad with the market. So he started and we planted together in 2002 red grapes here in Jerez. I know it sounds pretty weird, and it was. It was pretty fashionable at the end of the 90s, at the beginning of the 2000s in Spain. Everybody were planting international grapes, mostly French grapes like Syrah, Cabernet, and everything. And what happened is that my father wanted to avoid the sherry thing because he was a really well-known winemaker. And he didn't want, people staring at him for the project of Luis Perez. So he planted like international red grapes for people to, let Luis alone, And what happened is that 20 years ago, nobody was doing like red wines or even, you know, this kind of whites. And we grew up really fast. At the beginning, this was our house, and we, you know, were doing all the wines, making all the wines here, really, really tiny space. And, you know, there was everything done by the family in the vineyard and everything. This is my sister Marta. This is my sister Fatima also. The rest, this is my father. The rest are friends. And this, this is me and my friend Francis. And this was, you know, my life during like 10 years, more or less. What happened was that I was traveling to Australia to, you know, doing harvest in the another hemisphere, as you might think. And when I think it was 2008, I was I tell in the history several times, but I was in Australia, and as you know, Australia were like a sherry country also. And they were asking me in the winery, in Blaisdell winery, all the time, Willy, we want to recover the sherries, and you need to teach us everything about cherries. They had a really big tonnel, we said, with 2,000 liters or something like that, and it was labeled as Australian sherry. So it was beautiful with 150 years or something like that, really old. And I was excited, no? But everybody were asking me difficult question, weirdy question for me, because they asked me like, Willy, why do you need to fortify the sherries? And I replied like, you know, because Palomino, which is our grape, can't reach naturally 15. And they replied like, why do you use just Palomino? Why do you don't use like PX or another, you know, grape that can reach 15? And I replied, this is our tradition. And I was, you know, giving this answer and realizing at the same time that it was a really bad answer. It was, you know, the thing, I was tough since I was a child, but in fact, you know, I wasn't agree. So when I came back to Spain, this is something that I know is happening all the time. When you go outside your country, you find your identity always. So when I came back, I was like really, really Jerezano guy, you know? And I was starting to read everything. I started with the 20th century books of sherry. And when I read them all, I started to read the 19th century, the 18th century, the 17th century, until I was finishing all the commercial books. And I was learning sherry. So because my, you know, I was hard, you know, because I needed to understand deeply my roots. And suddenly I started to ask my father, my teachers in the university, everybody, you know, the things I was learning from these books about, you know, winemaking and everything was completely different. And everybody replied me like, Willy, forget it. Those were another times. This is another kind of winemaking. This is not sherry. But I was, you know, keeping reading and reading and, you know, doing my own path with the sherries. And suddenly I found a book of a guy called James Busby. Maybe you know him. He's a Scottish guy that traveled to Jerez in the 1830s, okay, 200 years ago. And he was looking for plants and knowledge to plant a vineyard in England. So for me, it was pretty weird. You know, a guy 200 years ago planting a vineyard in England. So I was reading this book, you know, really late at night in my bed, you know, in a really difficult English for me to read. And this book my father took from the garbage in Domecq, so it was in really bad condition. And I was like, what? So this guy interviewed all the big winemakers of the moment, of the beginning of the 19th century. And one of them was Pedro Domecq. You need to know that Jerez has two founder fathers, philosophical founder fathers. One of them is Pedro Domecq, the founder father of Domecq Winery, and another one is Manuel Maria González Ángel, who is the founder of González Vallas. Okay, this is two vision. Pedro Domecq is sapidity, intensity wines, and more oxidative. And Manuel Maria, that comes from Sanlúcar, is more like reductive wine, more pale wines, and they are completely different. But among everything, Pedro Domecq was a really important, person in the history of Jerez, maybe the more important of all. So it was a really beautiful interview of this guy, James Busby, asking Pedro Domecq the winemaking of the moment in the sherry wines. So Pedro Domecq gives a beautiful interview of, I think it was like 3 or 4 pages, talking about soils, the chalky soils, the clay, the pruning, the grapes, the fermentation. It was like 95% connecting to my generation, to my point of view, because you need to know that for me and for my generation, the cherries was something really, something to avoid, because as winemakers, we were looking for soils, for plants, for terroir, and the cherry represent, something completely different, fortifying the wines, adding sugar. It was something closer to a spirit than a wine itself. So we were looking for nature, and my generation never get connected to the cherries. Since I was a child, I was grown listening beautiful histories about the cherries and the very wealthy winemakers or whatever, but I didn't feel this connection. But I found with Pedro Domecq interview, because if Pedro Domecq, the biggest winemaker ever in Jerez history, was telling everything about soils, about plants, about, everything connecting to my generation, I found the connection 200 years ago. And that was a magical moment for me. It was I call it my night of fire. So because it was revealed for me something completely different. I was in this road, but this moment was really important for me. So the next morning, I wake up as a completely new. So we're here. Let's move again to maybe, I don't know, I was telling about identity, James Busby, this guy and everything. So I'm going to explain you again about La Riva. And my friend and colleague, Ramiro, he traveled with me to Australia. And he was reading all those books I told you before about, what was happening in Jerez in the 19th and 18th century. So we have been seeing as outsiders since that, because our message was really hard to achieve, to understand in the actual sherry region, not right now, but 10 years ago was difficult to understand. So we, released it. We found La Riva, what was a really old winery with a really, really good wines, and it was disappeared. So we recovered just the name to recover the message, And as I told you before at the beginning, this is something completely free, it's set us free from our vineyards, from our wines, from our philosophy, because here we just need, it doesn't matter if we buy the grapes to a Grand Cru, it doesn't matter if we buy the wines and we bottle, it's something for feeling free and to, show people that you can achieve something from the terroir, and also having 15 years of crianza biológica, for example, and it's something that you're going to explain later with the manzanillas. Okay, so let's start with moving to 3 highlights really, really fast. I don't want to bore you. Let's start with the soils. I'm pretty well known for being a freaky with soils, but I'm gonna do it fast, I promise. So this is the situation we had in Spain like 20 million years ago, okay? We didn't have Andalusia, we didn't have the Balears, okay? So with the alpine bending, everything was merging from the ocean, okay? So it generated the Beticus Strait, and it was very important for aquatic being called diatom. I don't know how to say in English, maybe it's diatom, whatever. It's a kind of algae that when it dies, have a skeleton of calcareous skeleton and fell to the bottom of this Beticus Strait. So this diatom needs 2 main things for living. One of them is light, And another one is organic material. It's an algae. Okay, you need also salinity, pH, whatever. But light and organic material is really important. And what happened? In the ocean, you have the light in the surface and you have the organic material in the bottom. So you have like 3 kilometers separating both. So you can't have diatom living because you don't have light and organic material in the same place. But here in this Beticus Strait, with all this strong current and the narrow surface, all the organic material were like upwelling to the surface, feeding the diatoms. Then the diatoms died, and then you have the Albariza soil. That's why we have this really, really high calcareous content in our soil. So after 15 million of years, everything, all the Guadalquivir River were filled with Albariza, okay? So this is the situation we have right now. We have the 136 meters, which is the maximum height we have in the classic Marco de Jerez. Of course, it's really low. And maybe you will ask, you know, you can't have like these wines in this really south in Europe. It's too hot, but we have the Atlantic Ocean. I will explain it later because it's really important. But talking about soils, the highest, the better, because you don't have clay here. And for us, the higher it means the more pure Albariza you will have, the less clay you will have. So they divide since the Roman times, 2000 years ago, in 3 categories. Of course, the sand are next together the ocean, then the clays, and then Albariza. So this was the 3rd category, 2nd category, and 1st category. So in that moment, in the 19th century, for example, they classified the wine by soils, not by aging. This is really important because wine from 9 years old from sand could be cheaper than a wine from Albariza when 1 year old. This is really important to understand that for the sherry region, the soils are everything since the last 50 years, that everything changed, okay? And this is really important for us also for the grapes, because we had these grapes to make sherry. Right now we have like 99% of Palomino and just a tiny percent of PX and Moscatel. But in that moment, we had everything before Phylloxera. And we achieve our categories like Fino, Oloroso, Manzanilla, whatever, depending of the grapes and depending of the soils. Okay, this is really important because Palomino, as you can see, he's really pale and it's going in the more chalky soil. And then Perruno, Cañocazo, Mantuo, we use it to make Oloroso type, and they work really well in clays because you are looking for this volume in your mouth, and also for Moscatel and Tintia that works really well in sands. Obviously, this is a really long history to tell. I don't want to bore you, but Palomino, ungrafted before Phylloxera, resist like 70% of calcareous soils, calcareous component. This is quite important. Tintia don't resist calcareous component. So that's why it's also here. So this is, really, really, really long history. But the thing I want you to know is that this situation made the sherry in the past and not the winery. This is the sherry of Pedro Domecq, okay? And these different soils make different roots and, of course, different wines. And we have the first category inside the Albarizas, okay, which we call Tosca Cerrada, which are the mostly first category. And it's like the medium in the mouth. But we also have 2 special categories that makes the Grand Cru in the area, okay? Tosca de Lentejuelas, okay, which is really soft and you can have a lot of roots in it. The roots are bigger and thicker. The wines are fresher, cooler. And here you have Tosca de Barajuelas. Barajuelas is like baraja de cartas in Spanish. It's like deck of cards because this laminar shape it has. And this Barajuela soil It's in the top of the hills always. It's like, you know, in Macharnudo, Carrascal. And the roots are like all the time really thin because need to go inside this, you know, laminar structure. So these wines are really horizontal with a lot of savory sensation, the sapidity we say here, and it makes like natural amontillado. So this is fresh, this is really complex, and this is like the normal situation, okay? So the climate, as I told you before, I'm gonna be really fast with it. You have the Atlantic Ocean here, and if you move in to the coast, the wines are gonna be fresh, and the body is gonna be light. And if you move inland, you're gonna have more savory sensation and more full body. And this is really important because if you move from Lebrija to Chipiona driving is just 28 kilometers, and the difference in temperature is huge. Maybe it's like 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. It could be like 53, 54 Fahrenheit, which is really huge in viticulture. It's the same difference we can have in the whole country, the whole Spain. So that's why the Pagos system is so important for us. I will explain what Pago is, but this is really important because in every Pago we have different temperature. Every 200, 300 meters is completely different, and you can feel in your skin just walking. You know, if you move to the Atlantic Ocean, it's really cold. That's why Cádiz and the region is really, really cold, cooler than Seville, which is in the north, or Cordoba, which is even more in the north, because the Atlantic Ocean, okay? So we have two things, two highlights right now. Soils, really important, and then Atlantic Ocean. And the third factor, which is for me the more important, is the history we had in the Marco Jerez. It's so long, too long, that we had, in every Pago a different history. This is a Pago, more or less. It's a group of vineyards traditionally sharing the same hill with the same soil. It could be like 15 to 30 vineyards. It's a group. It could take like 200 acres, more or less, to 500 acres, something like that. And each of them has this, different, completely different personality, different way of pruning, different grapes, different, disease, pest, different way of thinking, even with the, more funny when you are in the coast, there are like people talking a lot. When you are inside, people are like shut when it's working, completely different. And this history has like 2,000 years because starting from Balbaina and ending in Carrascal, they are completely different. And that is really important for us. I will explain you later in every Pago. So people, I think, yes, we are ready to open the first bottle, tiny bottle. It's not easy, I know. You need to screw and take it and remove it with a key if it's too close it. Take your time. Let's start with El Muelle de Olaso. I know you all the time say Muelle de Olaso. Muelle means like dock, when you dock in the beach. So El Muelle de Olaso is placed, born in El Pago de Carrascal. So if we move again to this one, if you see my mouse, the Pago de Carrascal is here, just in the center of El Marco de Jerez, okay? But if you put in Jerez again, here, it's like more inland, okay, of the classical Pagos, because this semicircle, they are the really, really famous Pagos in El Marco de Jerez. So Carrascal was really famous by oloroso type, okay, oxidative, and also for sweet wines. So here we have this is the Pago de Carrascal with all the vineyards, and it has 8 sub-Pagos, okay, each of them with different personalities, different history. And then we have right now El Corregidor, which is inside Carrascal Alto, which is the more famous, and El Corregidor is like the Grand Cru of the Pago. Okay, it's the highest point, the more chalky soil, and this is the situation we have with plants. This is our soil. This is the more chalky soil we have, and then the darker, the more organic material we have, and the palest, the more chalky soil. So we divide and we harvest in different parcels, and El Muelle de Olaso comes from this side, the more organic material, because we are looking for more fruit. Okay, and if you have the glass, everybody, I suppose, is achieved to open this difficult tiny bottle. And the soil is Tosca de Berjuel, as I told you before. We have like 70% of Palomino Fino, which is the traditional grape we have for pale wines. We have also 25% of PX, which is a grape with a really, really thin skin, and it has always a lot of concentration. And also have a 5% with a blend of Mantuo and Vigiriega, which are really, really old grapes we are recovering, okay? So this wine, we call it Vino de Pasto. Pasto in Spanish means eat, okay? So it's like saying table wine. And Vino de Pasto was a classification sherry region had in the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century. And it was really important for us, and we lost it. And now there's a movement, a huge movement, recovering these white wines. This is really important for the cherry region. In fact, all the wines we're trying today, for me, the highlights is not El Muelle maybe, but the white wines in the region. Because right now there's a really difficult moment for Finos and Manzanillas. They are really cheap, and they're wines with 3, 5, 10, 15 years under floor. And they are selling for 3, 4, 6 euros. And that's crazy. This is not profitable. And we need to put with the white wines and understand the terroir and push the rest of category up, and the white wines will help us to do this. Even for young people that is coming to the region that can't afford to having a fino soleraje because it's really expensive, you can easily come to the region, buy grapes in a wonderful vineyard, in a Grand Cru, really, really cheap, and the next year you can have a cherry. And hopefully the next year, or maybe 2 years, 3 years, we still don't know, these wines are gonna be under the DO. Right now they are outside, but we are really, really close to achieve to have the white wines under the DO. Remember the name, Vino de Pasto, means eat, vino, table wine, okay? So El Muelle is the first step in our winery, okay? It's the entry level. So it's like fermented in tank, a stainless tank. And it just have like 3 to 4 months of floor, because we are looking for this little touch of cherry sensation. For us, we need this identity. The identity for me comes from the vineyard, del Corregidor, which is, as you know, really famous for oxidative aging. So for me, the Pelo de Flor needs to be in this sensation. Ripe grape, this is really important for Carrascal, ripe grape in your mouth, more like tropical fruit or ripe fruit, and then this tiny amount of flor character. The saltiness in the mouth. I'm not the winemaker, the typical winemaker giving you a lot of flavors and and everything. Forget about you can ask me if you want, but just look for the chokiness in your mouth. This is the main thing for El Muelle. Chokiness, salty sensation, and the wine as is inland needs to fall to your throat. And remember this trick for you to do a really well blind tasting with the cherries, with the white wines in the cherry region, and also with the red wines. If the wine is in the coast, the wine will fall in your mouth to the point of your tongue, to the entrance of your mouth. Okay, coastal, and then if the wine is inland, the wine will fall to your throat, and the sensation you have here. This is really important for me to understand the terroir, the soils, and the ocean, okay? So that's El Muelle. You can, write me whatever you need to ask about the wine, but let's move to the next wine, which is La Escribana. Is placed in El Pago de Macharnudo, which is the famous one. This is the place for Domecq, and it's a high, a mountain of chalky soil. It's really, really pure, really, really white. This is La Escribana. In fact, this is San Cayetano because we have 2 vineyards there. And I'm in love with this vineyard. It's beautiful because it's surrounded. Look, this is El Pago de Macharnudo, okay? It's really close to Carrascal, their neighborhoods, okay? But here we have like 7 or 8 vineyards that are really, really, really beautiful in the past. They were Grand Cruz. This is Valdespino. Maybe you have heard about it. Wonderful vineyard, wonderful wineries, wonderful person with Eduardo Ojeda, winemaker there, really close friend. You have here La Hortelana. This is La Riva, old house, wonderful vineyard. You have Blázquez here. You have La Escribana, San Cayetano here, the one you're trying right now, the second wine. Here you have Viña Sabel. It's a wonderful Grand Cru. You have Los Arcos here, Botaina, Panameña, and in the center, you have our vineyard, the El Majuelo, the castle of El Majuelo, which is the best known vineyard ever in the history of Spain, at least in the last 3 centuries. Really important, and it was really important in the 19th century in Europe, and it was the house of Pedro Domecq, okay? This is the place where James Busby interviewed Pedro Domecq, this. So La Escribana, we bought the vineyard in 2018, so it's like 700 meters from El Majuelo. So for me, it's like something like erotical, something really close to Pedro Domecq. And even Botaina, which is my favorite vineyard ever in El Marco Jerez, that is placed here. And so what I'm looking for in La Escribana is a Macharnudo sensation, okay? I can't tell you everything about Macharnudo. The history is beautiful, but it's too long. But you need to know that it was really, really famous because the Amontillado style. Because the Amontillado style needs the sapidity sensation, the calcareous sensation that Macharnudo has because the high calcareous content. So Amontillado is not something about having a wine, fortifying, having floor, and then fortifying again, and then you have oxidative character. It wasn't like that in the past. Just forget about it. This is construction. This is the winemaker in the winery, and it's something quite modern. Amontillado needs to born in the vineyard, and in the past they didn't fortify like twice and then moving to 17. Just forget about it. Amontillado needs to, born in the vineyard because the calcareous sensation. Because when you have this concentration in your wine, the velo de flor can't develop properly. So you have the oxidation and you have the flor at the same time. So it's doing together in the time, not at different parts, okay? So moving, okay, this is more maps and I have a lot of maps on Macharnudo. Okay, this is beautiful because you can easily see, this is an NDVI index that measure, the photosynthesis more or less, and to make the long history short. And this is the north and this is the south. And look at this is quite green and this is quite chalky and a lot of concentration. So you pay attention, all the Grand Crus are placed here in the chalky soil, okay? So Domecq takes from these grapes the oloroso types like Rio Viejo, really famous wine. And here, this is a place for amontillados, okay? This is a beautiful, because sometimes the science can, reach the winemaking properly in history, and that's wonderful. And this is the famous spider of Macharnudo. This is the top hill of El Santo and 8 legs, each of them with 1 Grand Cru, okay? So, moving back to La Escribana 19, I'm not also the way, sorry, but I'm not like to speak a lot about the years, the harvest, the 19. The 19 it was a really concentrated harvest because we had a low rainfall. But what you need to know from La Escribana is that it's a Tosca de Barajuelas, really pure, really calcareous. It's 100% Palomino, and it has 12 months under floor. But the surface we let to La Escribana is really, really, really small, because we don't need this big surface of crianza biológica. I don't know if you can watch me in the screen right now, because this is important for you to understand. The shape of the cask is like this, and the floor is a yeast that floats in the surface of the wine. So if you let air in the surface and you release the wine, you will have in the half of the cask, you have a lot of surface. But if you fill the cask till the end, you will have just a tiny surface, okay? So the difference is it could be like 6 or 7 times of surface of floor, and it makes a completely different effect in the wine. So La Escribana, sorry, I'm gonna put the wine in my glass. I just have one. It's a wine that is also a vino de pasto, okay? But it's like the big brother of El Muelle, okay? So you can easily find here a sensation of sherry inside, the sensation of floor aging, and this is really, really, really chalky in your mouth. And it's beautiful because if you compare with El Muelle, the Muelle, you know, being more inland and being more in Carrascal, falls more to your throat, and La Escribana is placed more in the center of your mouth. Remember the trick, the more inland, the more coastal, and this is in the center. So that's why Macharnudo is so famous, because, you know, the game is in the center of your mouth. It's also touching the point of your tongue, it's also touching your throat, but the game is in the center. That's why it's so famous, okay? So let me try it.
Willy?
Sí.
Apart from the vineyards and the grape varieties, what's the difference in terms of winemaking between these two wines?
Yeah, okay. El Muelle, as I told you before, was fermented in tank. Probably I picked the grapes of El Muelle later than La Escribana. It depends of the year, because I am looking for more ripeness in El Muelle. You need to know that El Muelle probably is the first step in the winery, so I need people to understand that it's a cherry but also a white wine, okay? That's why I let the grapes more, you know, more ripe. And La Escribana, we make 2 passes, 2 trials. One of them is for green grape, another one is for the normal harvest. You need to know, I will explain later with Cabarubia, that the cherry never harvest at the same time all the parcel, never. It was mandatory at least 3 harvests in the same vineyard until 1969. So it was mandatory and really important. But we are here for La Escribana make 2 passes. One of them is green grape to correct acidity if it needed. And then the second one that is the normal and traditional harvest. Then we have like 7 hours of soleo in the 19, I think I remember. And soleo was another mandatory technique until 1969 again, that is put the grape under the sun to lose some water. It's something really old. We have been doing this for 2,000 years, and it was mandatory even for manzanillas and finos, all of them. And it's giving you the touch for having this more, you know, concentration in the mouth. It's really important for me. But I don't make a soleo in all the pagos and all the vineyards, and I don't make a soleo all the years. But for Macharnudo and Carrascal, it's so inside all the wines I've tasted before since the 1880s, more or less, 1890s, the beginning of the 20th century. All of them are related to a soleo in a little amount. So if as you see, I following the history all the time. So I like to have it, a little touch of soleo, even in the white wines. So we have like 7 hours of soleo, then a small pressing, and then we ferment in sherry cask, really old sherry cask from, 70, 80 years old, more or less. Then we let the velo de flor, a little surface, during 1 year. And then we have all the cabezuelas, which is the name for the yeast. How do you say yeast? The diet yeast, lees, sorry, the lees. Under the lees, 1 year, okay? And we don't move the lees and anything. We just let the floor and the surface, and that's all. That's winemaking, okay? Do you have any more question about the wines? There's something also that you need to know, that here in our wines, you won't find acidity. And this is really important to explain because the chalky character of our soil don't let the acidity to fit in the wine, okay? For me, you can build your wine from, we will see with the Tintia, with tannin, with the acidity, or with the chalky soil. That's why you can't have a Cabernet, for example, with a really calcareous soil, because it's too much. And here with our wines of the whites, if you have more acidity, it's battling against the grip you have with the chalky sensation, So one push another outside your mouth. That's why you can have like 5.5, maybe 6 grams of tartaric acid and no more, okay? Because the calcareous sensation, and even with the time, is growing and growing, and this grip is what keeps the wine alive, okay? This is really important to understand. Okay, I don't know if, okay, if you have 6 glasses or at least 2, we can put the Tintia right now and taste the Tintia. Okay, let's go. The problem is with me, I just have 1 glass, so I need to wash it. So the next wine is a red wine. I know it's really weird for you to understand that a red wine in the sherry region. It's not normal, I know, but in fact, we have been making red wine since, the Romans, till the 19th century, but we were making sweet red wine. And the Tintia is a grape that allows, because it has a lot of acidity and low tannins, to have a sweet red wine like Porto style. And it was pretty fashionable, and in fact, it was drunk in England in the 19th century in the church, in the, I don't know how to say, consecration. And it was really important, Tintia de Rota. So, I started to vinify when making this in 2004, I think, and 2006. And I forgot about the project, and I recovered again in 2011. And for me, it was really important to recover this grape because it was almost extinguished. There was just 2 hectares in the region 20 years ago in Rota, and it was almost disappeared, and it was, a pity. So I wanted to recover to make still red wines, because I was thinking with the climatic change and with the hot zone we have in Andalusia, whatever, this grape with high acidity and low tannins could match perfectly the terroir. The problem we have here is, as I told you before, the calcareous content in the soil, because it's too much that is battling against tannin, and the mouth, you can feel easily too much. So what happened is that the first year, it was a really big wine, and it was impossible to drink. And the next year, I pushed the skin a little, less. And the next year, I pushed the skin less and less and less until the last 3-4 years that I don't touch the skin at all, because I need to be close to a white wine. But the problem, it's not a problem that Tintia means like red color, okay? It has a lot of color, but it doesn't have this amount of tannin. So what we try with this project, because it don't represent to the winery, it's just a 5 or 10% of the wine we make, but it's really important for us because we have Tintia in all our vineyards. And for us, it's really beautiful to see how the terroir express, even in the red wines, like the white wines, is really, really close to the sensation you have in the white wines. If you are in the coast, Tintia falls here. If you are in the inland, the Tintia falls here. And it's really moving the same way that whites. And the sensation with barajuelas, with this soil has barajuelas, you have in the coast more flowers in the Tintia, more fruit, more fresh, but you also have this sherry sensation, this spicy sensation with curry, with these oriental spices you have in the sherry region through the calcareous soil. Okay, so just drink it. The winemaking is quite simple, as I told you before. We pick the grape at night in little cases, in little boxes. We select in a sorting table, then we vinify by gravity, and then we don't touch the skin at all. And we ferment like little cold, but not that much, trying to not, push too much the tannin. And then we have like nearly 1 year in oak, in French oak, and it's a really old French oak because the oak messes the Tintia up completely. Okay, so just drink it, enjoy it. And I forgot told you about Pago de Balbaina. That is one of my favorite. It's really old. You know that Balbaina is a Roman name. Ina means place, and Balba came from the Balbos family, which is where the richest family 2,000 years ago. And the history is really, really long. And we have books from this place since 2,000 years ago, because Columella, that was the biggest agronomist ever in the history of the mankind, and I'm not pretentious, he wrote the Re Rustica, 12 books of agronomy. That was wonderful, and he was born in Balbaina. So he described in the first moment in history the sands, the clays, and the calcareous soil. And it was the first classification, and we, 2,000 years later, we still, separating these three soils, and they're beautiful. So El Calderín del Obispo, which is the vineyard that the Tintia comes from, is placed here, just in El Cerro de Balbaina, in a high calcareous content, and really, really close to the Atlantic Ocean, okay? This is the closer pago you will find in Jerez to the Atlantic Ocean. Of course, Sanlúcar, El Puerto, all the coastal cities are closer to the Atlantic Ocean, but this is the closer of Jerez, okay? Really famous for different wineries as Osborne. Osborne was born in Balbaina, okay? Remember, if you know the name Osborne, of course. González Bayas in Carrascal, Domecq in Macharnudo, okay? Each of them has a different pago. And that's all. This is everything I already told you. So next move again to the cherries. So please, if you have just one glass, wash it, clean it. Sorry, guys. I think you are drinking at 2018. It was a cold harvest, okay? 2019 maybe is more salty, more concentrated. But I like this, or soft.
Willy, just a quick question.
Yep.
David Cañadas is asking if Tintia is the same grape as Graciano.
Yes.
From Rioja and Navarra.
Yeah. I've been researching it a lot of time, because at the beginning, all my professor in viticulture there in the university, they told that they were different. And in fact, if you compare, we have planted Graciano, and next to the Graciano, we have Tintia, and they develop differently, because the seed of the Graciano had like 2 to 3 seeds each grape, and Tintia only has 1 seed, big one. So obviously the winemaking is completely different. One big seed is completely different to having 2 to 3 small seeds, because the tanning develops completely different in winemaking. And also the plants, the Tintia spreads like this and the Graciano falls more. They're different, but genetically they are the same, they say. So after several, the Tintia was described in the zone in 1656, like 400 years ago. So it's quite old. But in fact, they are all related to a Portuguese grape. I lost the name. I was telling about it this morning, but I lost the name. And it's also the Graciano Tintia, but the original one was the Portuguese. Okay, it's in the northwest of Porto. But I can say they are the same. Okay, guys, let's open in the Cabarubia bottle, and let's, we are moving to the cherries completely. Okay, for me the white wines are also cherries, but this is cherry, as you know. So this is the Corregidor again, the same vineyard we tasted with El Muelle de Olaso. And this is quite old vineyard. As I told you before, I'm going to sound pretentious, sorry, but this is the Grand Cru of Carrascal. It's a wonderful vineyard and it's quite old. It was owned by Sandeman during 2 centuries at least. And all the wine that they made there was really complex, really long, really ripe, really like Oloroso style, like Royal Corregidor, the wine of Sandeman. So this, as you can see, this is the Soleo. And traditionally, when I was younger, everybody told me that this was for PX, and it wasn't. This is Palomino for dry wines, okay? This photo is all, and this is what I've been telling you. And this is the main picture you will have in this presentation. Because if you know already the sherry, the history we have been told in the last 50 years is that if you have this grape and you put alcohol, you will have this wine or this. And you put more alcohol, you will have this wine. And if you put alcohol and sugar, you will have this wine. And that is pretty new. And that's as pretty, I don't know how to say in English, construccional. It's like building the wine in the winery. In the old times, in the 19th century, when we sold the cherries really expensive, every ripeness gave them different categories. So if you have a green grape, you will have a Vino de Pasto. So here you have, for example, a Fino. This is for Oloroso grape, and this is for nearly sweet, a cream sherry. We call it Raya. It's the base wine for cream sherry. This is completely different than fortifying this, or fortifying and adding sugar, or fortifying at the beginning and then fortifying again to add sugar, or whatever. This step, taking the same wine, is the, I don't want to say illness or something like that, but this is something really bad for the region. Because if you say that, in that moment you say that this is the same fortifying than having the ripeness and the correct and the natural evolution of the cherries, you are forgetting about vineyards. And if you forget about vineyards, at the beginning, it's not that bad, okay? You move to the winery and you manage the winemaking and you manage everything, and the wines get, more elegance, more balance, because you can control more in the winery. But the second generation is a step more, and then suddenly the vineyard is not important. And the third generation, they are not ashamed for fortifying. They like mandatory to fortify the wine. So the problem is not as we're working right now. The problem is that we forget that the sherry, in fact, is this. Okay? So there's a difference. That's why we don't push against traditional or classic wineries. That's why you are going to try right now 2 manzanillas that they are fortified. The problem is that we don't need to forget that this is what makes sherry big, separating ripeness from different parcels. And of course, we start here in July and here in October, 60 days in the same parcel. This is pretty important. And of course, every parcel has a percent of different states. You can easily find a east side, east slope oriented, and you will have like 80% of this grape and just a 10% of this and 10% of this. Or maybe west have like 80% of this, 10 of this, and 10 of this. And so every day, you know, in the you know, before the night, before the harvest, I walk through the vineyard and say, we need to pick like 6 or 7 carretadas of this grape from this vineyard and one of these. Okay, so just remember, not something mathematical. We need to get open mind, and sometimes you can easily find this grape under the leaves, and in the same grape you can find this because it's outside the leaves and the sun is giving this oxidation character. So the oxidation needs to come from the vineyard, not from the aging. The aging gives you a really elegant oxidation, but the first one, the original one, comes from the vineyard, okay? From the sun. Okay. This is more or less the same. This is the Palma style, which in vintage we call it Palma, Criaderas and Soleras we call Fino. This is the ripeness, you know, Oloroso. In vintage we call it Cortado, and in Criaderas and Soleras we call it Oloroso. And the Raya is the same, Raya in vintage, and Jerezano, which is the ancient of cream sherry. So this is the original classification. I had written a book with Ramiro about this. So if you want to read, I can send it to you, okay? It's online. And just finishing to reach Cabarubia, and just, you need to pardon my interruption tasting wine, but it is really important because I want to explain you what the floor aging means to me, okay? If you are in France, for example, on a northern climate, the makeup you can do to your wine needs to push the volume bigger, because sometimes you have a green tannin there, or sometimes you need to polish, you need to put your volume bigger, whatever, and you can easily do it with a new oak or French oak or American oak or whatever that fits really good with a cold climate, because you expand the wine. But in a hot climate like Jerez, we already have a big volume wine, too big, in fact. So our makeup is the reverse, it's the opposite. We need to reduce the volume. So does the crianza biológica, the floor aging, because the floor aging eats alcohol and the floor aging eats glycerin that makes the wine hot. Both of them. Alcohol makes the wine really hot. So we have this volume. The more floor aging you have, the less body you will have. So you need to see this as a technique. The problem is, the last 50 years, we understood floor aging as the aim, as the objective of the wine, the final result. We measure the quality by the years we have been aging under floor. You have 5, good. You have 15, best, you know? And this is a problem, because this is an interpretation of distillates, of spirits, of a whiskey, you know? The more, the better. And for us, for a winemaker, we need to match the terroir, you know? If you are, for example, in Carrascal, and you are in a 2015, a hot climate, you know, a hot harvest, sorry, the wine is too big. You can release the wine, okay, and put a lot of surface of velo to reduce the volume. But if you are in a 2013 or 14, if you are in the coast, you don't need to reduce the volume. Can you hear me, Alvaro?
Yes, loud and clear.
Sorry, I think Zoom is doing because I'm getting too intense with floor explanation. Sorry. So let's share
Really
my screen.
quick question, just to break it up a bit. Someone's asking if it's true that floor can survive below 15% ABV?
Yeah, it's beautiful, but it's a really good question. You know, what happened traditionally is that we said here in Jerez that you need 15% to have a, you know, correct floor develop. But in fact, if you are in 9 or 10% of alcohol, the floor develops better, really better. If you are in 11 or 12, it's better. So the problem is the bacteria also develops better. So 15% is the how do you say, the zone that you can move without bacteria and the yeast also resist. But in fact, with 13% of alcohol, you will have a better floor always. If you let a glass with Palomino with 9 or 10, 11% of alcohol, you will have floor in 2 days or 3. But if you are 15, you will have floor in 20 or 25 days. So in fact, the alcohol reduces the quantity of floor. Okay, this is quite important. But this is also, I don't know if you can share, Alvaro, our documentary about floor to the group, to the Cervantes community, also to the sorting table. Yeah. Because we have a documentary explaining everything, you know, how the floor develops with different alcohol, but the main thing for floor is the vineyard. Maybe, you know, the history we know today is that if the winery is in the coast, or the winery is colder, and the winery is in land and it's hotter, the velo de flor develops completely different. And this took the interpretation of the winery winemaking. But in fact, it's nothing, okay, it's important, but it's nothing to do with that. You know, the wine choose the floor. And just watch the documentary. It's really important for you to understand that the floor is a yeast. And as a fermentation, when you have a really thin white wine, for example, the fermentation is going to be like really explosive and whatever. And if you have a big white, the fermentation is going to be really complicated. It's the same with floor, exactly the same. The problem is when you blend all the vineyards and you blend all the pagos, you just need to point everything in the winery. So obviously the wine are going to be different with different temperature. You know, it's like 5 years, 10 years of aging. The temperature of the winery is going to be really important. But if it's the same, like, I don't know, you have 2 bottles of Romanée Conti, and one of them you have in your kitchen, and another one you have in the cellar. So you open both bottles 10 years later. So obviously they are going to be really different. Really different. But the problem is that you don't explain Romanée Conti by this. You explain Romanée Conti because the vineyard. Obviously, this is an exaggeration because floor is a living being. Okay, it's important the temperature that develops, but it's way more important the vineyard, the roots, the soil, the orientation of the vineyard, how the mast, the vitamins you have in the mast, the content of glycerin after fermentation, everything. But if you blend everything and you fortify it, obviously you need to focus in the winery. Okay, so let's start with Cabarubia. Okay, this is a blend of different, it's a non-vintage, okay, but it's not criaderas and soleras because we follow the path of vintages that it was the original winemaking of Jerez. Criaderas and soleras is from Sanlúcar, and this wine comes from Carrascal again, as I told you before, the El Corregidor. So again, Tosca de Barajuelas, pretty boring, the soil is always the same, and 100% Palomino Fino. And this is the Tercera Suerte Vendimia, means like these grapes, okay, more or less. And as I told you before, it has like, this could have like 1 day of soleo, more or less. 1 day under the sun. Every day you let the grape under the sun, you gain 1% of alcohol. So this wine, I don't really into having 15% like mandatory. Sometimes we are in the DO, sometimes we are outside the DO. It depends on the harvest. For me, the balance is first, you know. Sometimes we reach 15 because I think the harvest is hotter and the wine can resist and the balance is in 15. Sometimes we are in 14.5 or even 14. You know, it doesn't matter for me. It's like reaching, and the level of floor needs to reach the fruit and reach the terroir. It's more like that. Okay, so this is in fact, Cabarubia sometimes is inside the DO, so it's the first Fino without fortifying in Jerez. But as I told you, it's not important for me. It's not important for the winemaking. For me, the importance is how Sandeman did everything in Corregidor during the last 200 or 300 years. This is the history, and find the balance in the parcel and understand that this for me is a white wine and the floor is secondary. Okay, so drink it as a white wine with a touch of floor. Okay, yes, let's try it. It was aged for like 4 years more or less on the floor, more or less 3 to 4 years. Then, as you can drink and smell, it's nearly close to Amontillado. But for me, it's really important for you to understand the mouth, because the softness of the mouth, I'm not looking for zero glycerin in this wine. I'm not looking for, this is a problem for me when you extend too much the floor aging and the wine is not prepared. You have this, I don't know how to say hueco. How to say hueco in English, Alvaro? This little valley in the mouth, okay? And you're losing the center of the mouth, which is for me the main thing for a white wine. Then I let the floor, but sometimes I fill the barrel more to avoid the floor, to reduce this center of the mouth, okay? So for me, it's like putting a belt and just putting like this to the wine, okay? So that's all. If you have any question with Cabarubia, because I think I'm passing my time, let's move to the coast, to Sanlúcar with La Riva project, okay? So let's move to Miraflores. So people, we are in Sanlúcar. This is more like jazz style, more funny. So let's drink, because Sanlúcar is the personality of the wines and the people are completely different. In fact, all my family comes from Sanlúcar. My 4 grandparents comes from Sanlúcar. And this is completely different point of view in winemaking, in viticulture. In fact, everything what you know right now from Jerez comes from Sanlúcar. And I'm speaking sincere. All the dry wines you tasted before from Jerez region is Sanlúcar style. The Jerezano style is oxidative aging, is more like sweet sensations, and it's more like really big. But Sanlúcar was made for the England, for the country drinkers, for the Andalusian drinkers with more hot weather than the England drinker that preferred in the past, like sweet, big body wines. Sanlúcar was made for Andalusia, for hot. That's why they manage the floor so well. They manage the criaderas and soleras, and they manage the pale wines. That was Manuel Maria that bring from Jerez to Jerez, from Sanlúcar to Jerez, the style of Sanlúcar. So criaderas and soleras, so floor aging, so pale wines, everything comes from Sanlúcar. So with La Riva, as I told you before, Manuel Antonio de La Riva, this long and difficult name to say in English, it's an open-minded project that I share with Ramiro. So we have a friend that owns a winery, beautiful winery. His name is Luis del Rio, and his family has been related to Miraflores, which is this Pago, and in Sanlúcar is here, okay? This is the coast. This is the river Guadalquivir that ends here, and this is Atlantic Ocean. So it could be like 3 kilometers or something like that from the coast. It's really, really cold place. And here is Casilla Verde, this parcel. And he also has a winery that is in the beach. Okay, he has a private beach in the winery. That's wonderful. So he was working with me, like 5-6 years ago, doing the practicals. I don't know how to say in English. And he's a really close friend, and he let Ramiro and me to make this wine there. So it comes from this vineyard, and what we're looking for here is for freshness. Okay, we don't want this long aging sherry here, and in fact this one is fortified, but this is like 3 years, no more, under floor. Okay, 2 to 3, and in fact every year we are reducing the amount of floor to 2 years and less, because we're looking for a coastal wine. We're looking for the saltiness. If you drink it and you compare with Cabarubia, they're like completely different worlds. And that's El Marco de Jerez for me. That's identity. And that's what we're looking for. Even over, the quality of the wines, over the balance, for me, is the identity. So you need to look for here the coastal, the Atlantic Ocean, the saltiness, the freshness. Let me drink it. Okay, if you feel it, if it falls to the point of your tongue, the saltiness, it's completely different to Cabarrubia. If you have both glasses, you can compare. Different world, people, different world. And let's move to the last one, if we have time for any more question. So this is Manzanilla Verde, Viña Casilla Verde. This is the Luis del Rio one. Tosca de Lentejuela, sorry, because this is the another soil I talked you before, the soft one, which is typical for the coast. It also has a little amount of clay in the low part of the vineyard, okay? And 36 months, sometime less, sometime a little more, okay? It's not that important. And right now we're moving to the Pasada style. Again, we're moving to Jerez. So we're looking for more concentration. And this wine, we have the soleraje in our winery, but we never harvest this wine before. That's why I told you that we are free as winemaker to buy the wine and preserving as soleraje. And it comes from this vineyard, Los Cuadrados, in the bottom, okay? It was a Sanluqueño style, because it's also a Manzanilla because it was aged in Sanlúcar, but it doesn't make sense for me. As I told you before, it should be a Fino because it was born in a vineyard from Jerez. But that's the classification under the DO. Both of them, both Manzanillas are under the DO as Manzanilla, Manzanilla Pasada. And this is a completely different style from the previous one and completely different from Cabarrubia, because this is a 15 years old under floor, okay? 15 years under floor, sorry. And sometimes, as I told you before, and there's a really good examples in Jerez for this long aging as, Panesa, for example, or sometimes, like Viña Ave, for example, for González Díaz. These are really, really good wines with long-term aging. Sometimes you can find the balance with a long aging on their floor. So what you will have here is a coastal vineyard, but from Jerez. So you will find more concentration than the previous wine, but you will also have all the lees of the reduction after years and everything that puts this wine in a really, really different level. The complexity is huge, and I really, really, really enjoy this wine. It's really soft in the mouth. I could drink a palette of this wine because it's really soft. It's moving in your mouth, really quietly. Okay, it's pretty extreme if you're looking for a white wine. Of course, this is really into cherries, but it's lovely to understand that this is Balbaina. Even 15 years later, still Balbaina in your mouth. Okay, so this is wonderful. So people, it was this is the bottle. Okay, you have the picture and you have the presentation. 15 years on the floor. This is everything. Thank you for everything. I don't know, Alvaro, if you want to ask me anything or you want to share.
I don't know if there's any more questions from the audience.
Any more question? I explaining everything as you can see. I'm pretty emotional with everything.
Very passionate. That definitely
Very
comes
passionate.
through.
Sorry, I lost you here. I'm very passionate, and I'm pretty into the sherries. I'm pretty into the vineyards. I'm pretty into the white wines, and just resuming everything. I think we need to make more steps to the vineyards. We need more new winemakers in the region with open-minded, way of thinking, and we need to understand that the sherry is in the winery, but also is in the vineyard. We have really, really good conditions to have good wines, and this, I think, for me, the next 5 to 10 years for the region are going to be beautiful, and that's all.
Amazing. Well, if there's no more questions, I'd just like to thank Willy for his time. It's been amazing. Really, really amazing seminar, webinar, tasting. Thank you to Instituto Cervantes as well, and the sourcing table. Will, thanks for making this possible. And well, thank you, all of you, for being there and sharing this evening with all of us and meeting Willy and tasting through the wine. So thanks to you all.
Beautiful. Thank you, people. I'll see you here whenever you want. Okay? Bye. Bye from Jerez.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night.